My boss stole my project and presented it as his own to the CEO. He didn't know I had recorded everything, and the CEO was about to find out. Let me tell you about the most satisfying moment of my entire career, the moment I watched my boss's face drain of all color in front of the entire executive board. But to understand why that moment was so sweet, I need to take you back about 8 months. I'd been working at a mid-sized tech company called Meridian Solutions for about 3 years. Nothing glamorous. We made software for logistics companies, the kind of stuff that keeps trucks moving and warehouses organized. Boring to most people, but I genuinely loved it. There's something deeply satisfying about solving complex routing problems, about shaving milliseconds off processing times that translate to millions of dollars saved for our clients. I was a senior developer, and I was good at what I did. Really good. My boss, Greg Harrison, was another story entirely. Greg was one of those guys who failed upward his whole life. He had the right handshake, the right golf buddies, and the right last name. His uncle, Richard Harrison, was on the board of directors. That's how Greg got the VP of Engineering title despite having the technical skills of a golden retriever trying to use a laptop. I'm not even exaggerating. I once watched him try to open a CSV file in Microsoft Word and then complain that the data looks weird. That's the level of technical expertise we're talking about. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not one of those people who hates their boss just because they're the boss. I've had great managers before. My previous manager, Linda, was incredible. She'd go to bat for her team, give credit where it was due, and actually understood the work we were doing. When Linda left for another company, Greg was brought in as her replacement, and the difference was like going from a 5-star restaurant to a gas station hot dog. Greg was the kind of guy who would schedule a meeting to discuss when to have the next meeting. He'd use buzzwords like synergy and paradigm shift and move the needle without a hint of irony. He once told us to think outside the box while staying inside the lane, and I still don't know what that means. He'd show up to stand-up meetings 20 minutes late with a Starbucks in hand and then ask us to circle back on things we'd already resolved. And worst of all, he had this nasty little habit of taking credit for other people's work. It started small. He'd rephrase my suggestions in meetings and present them as his own ideas. Like, I'd say, we should implement caching on the database layer to reduce query times. And then 2 minutes later, Greg would say, you know what I've been thinking? What if we implemented caching on the database layer? Same words, same idea, different credit. He'd forward my emails to upper management with his name on top. He'd take my weekly status reports, copy-paste them into his own reports, and send them to the CEO as if he'd written them. Annoying? Absolutely. Infuriating? You bet. But I let it slide because I figured that's just corporate politics. Pick your battles, right? I had a good salary, interesting work, and a team I liked. I could tolerate a credit-stealing boss. Then came Project Atlas, and everything changed. Our biggest client, a massive shipping company called Global Freight, was threatening to leave because our software couldn't handle their growing volume. They'd expanded into 3 new countries in the past year, and our routing algorithm was buckling under the load. Processing times had tripled, errors were up 40%, they were losing money, and they were blaming us. This was a $5 million a year contract. If Global left, it would be catastrophic. Layoffs, budget cuts, maybe worse. The CEO, Maria Vasquez, put out a company-wide call for proposals. She sent an email to every department head and senior employee. We need a solution. I don't care where it comes from. Whoever comes up with the best approach will lead the project and be considered for a senior leadership position. She was desperate, and she was smart enough to cast a wide net. I read that email and something clicked in my brain. I'd actually been thinking about this problem for months. Late at night, on my own time, I'd been sketching out ideas for a completely new approach to route optimization. Not just a patch or an upgrade, a fundamental redesign using machine learning to optimize routes in real time, adapting to traffic patterns, weather data, and delivery priorities on the fly. I threw myself into it. 3 weeks of my own time, nights, weekends, everything. My girlfriend at the time, Sasha, barely saw me. I'd come home from work, eat dinner in front of my laptop, and code until 2 a.m. On weekends, I'd be at my desk by 7 a.m. with a pot of coffee and wouldn't move until my back screamed at me to stop. I built a working prototype. I ran simulations using Global's actual data. Anonymized, of course, but structurally identical. The results were staggering. My algorithm processed routes 68% faster than our current system, with a 12% improvement in route efficiency. That translated to millions in fuel savings alone. I put together a 40-page document with architecture diagrams, cost projections, risk assessments, and a realistic 18-month timeline. I included benchmarks, comparison charts, and a phased rollout plan that would let us migrate Global without any service interruption. It was, without exaggeration, the best work I'd ever done. I was proud of it in a way I'd never been proud of anything professional before. I made one mistake, one stupid, trusting, naive mistake. I told Greg about it. See, company protocol said all proposals had to go through your department head before being submitted to the executive team. It was supposed to be a formality, a way to make sure proposals were polished and aligned with department goals. So I scheduled a meeting with Greg to walk him through my proposal before submitting it. I even brought him coffee, hazelnut latte, his favorite. I set up my laptop in his office, connected to his monitor, and spent a full hour walking him through every detail. The architecture, the algorithms, the machine learning models, the cost analysis, everything. Greg nodded along the whole time, occasionally saying things like, interesting, and I see where you're going with this, and this is really something. He asked a few questions, basic ones like, what's machine learning again, and how does the cloud part work? But mostly, he just listened. At the end, he leaned back in his chair, steepled his fingers like some kind of movie villain, and said, "This is great work. Really great. Let me review it over the weekend, and we'll submit it together on Monday. I want to make sure it's positioned correctly for the executive team." I thanked him. I actually thanked him. I walked out of his office feeling good, thinking my boss was finally going to support me on something meaningful. God, I was an idiot. Monday came. I walked into the office with a spring in my step, wearing my best button down, ready to submit the proposal that was going to change my career. That's when my coworker, Priya Sharma, intercepted me in the hallway with a look on her face like someone had died. "Did you see the email?" she whispered, grabbing my arm. "What email?" She pulled me into the break room and closed the door. I opened my laptop. There it was, sitting in my inbox like a grenade. An email from Greg to the entire executive team, CC'd to the board of directors, sent at 6:03 a.m. that morning. Subject line, Project Atlas Proposal, submitted by Greg Harrison, VP of Engineering. My proposal, word for word, diagram for diagram. He'd even left in a typo I'd made on page 23 where I'd written optimization as optimization. The only thing he changed was the name on the cover page. My name erased, his name in bold. My blood went cold, then hot, then cold again. I sat at the break room table for a solid 10 minutes just staring at the screen, my hands shaking so badly I could barely scroll. 3 weeks of my life, my nights, my weekends, my best work, stolen by a man who couldn't tell the difference between Java and JavaScript. Priya sat across from me, looking like she wanted to cry on my behalf. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I wanted to march into Greg's office right then and there. I wanted to flip his standing desk and scream in his face. I wanted to reply, all to that email, and expose him in front of everyone. The rage was so intense I could taste it, metallic, like biting down on aluminum foil. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the fact that I knew Greg was connected. His uncle was on the board. His golf buddy was the CFO. If it came down to his word against mine, who would they believe? The VP with family ties and a corner office? Or the senior developer with no proof? No proof. That phrase echoed in my head like a bell, and that's when the plan started forming. Slowly at first, like a photograph developing, then all at once. See, here's what Greg didn't know. When I presented my proposal to him in his office that Friday, I'd been recording the entire meeting on my phone. Not because I suspected he'd steal it. I swear that never crossed my mind. I actually recorded all my important presentations so I could review my delivery later and improve my communication skills. I'm weird like that. I have dozens of recordings of myself practicing pitches and explaining technical concepts, but now, that recording was pure gold. 53 minutes of audio where you could clearly hear me walking Greg through my proposal, explaining my algorithms, describing my architecture, while he asked basic questions that proved beyond any doubt that he was hearing this material for the first time. At one point, he literally says, "Wait, so the machine learning part, that learns on its own? That's not a question someone asks about their own work?" But I didn't play that card yet. Oh no. That would have been satisfying in the moment, but strategically stupid. Greg would deny it, claim we'd been collaborating, and his uncle would smooth things over. I needed something bigger, something undeniable, something that would make Greg destroy himself. I spent the next 2 days acting completely normal, defeated even. I congratulated Greg when the CEO praised his brilliant proposal in the all-hands meeting. I watched him puff up like a peacock in a suit, using words like innovative approach and outside-the-box thinking, and I really poured my heart into this one to describe work he couldn't explain if his life depended on it. I smiled. I clapped. I told him he deserved it. And inside, I was counting down the days. Then Maria did something that made my heart sing like a choir of angels. She announced that Greg would present the full technical details of Project Atlas to the board of directors in 2 weeks. Not a summary, not an overview, a deep dive technical presentation. Every algorithm explained, every architectural decision justified. Live Q&A with the board's technical advisor, Dr. Sarah Chen, who had a PhD in computer science from MIT and could smell technical BS from a mile away. Greg's face when Maria made that announcement? I wish I had a photograph. For just a split second, maybe half a second, I saw pure, undiluted terror flash across his eyes. His smile froze, his hand tightened around his coffee cup, because he knew he couldn't explain any of it. He didn't understand machine learning. He didn't understand neural networks. He didn't understand distributed computing. He barely understood how to use the office printer. That night, Greg called me at 9 p.m. Suddenly, I was his best friend. His voice was warm, buddy-buddy, almost pleading. "Hey, so I was thinking, since you helped me brainstorm some of the technical details for the proposal, maybe you could help me prepare for the board presentation. Just coach me through the technical stuff. I'll make sure you get credit as a contributor." A contributor to my own work. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of this man. But I said yes. Of course I said yes. I said it with enthusiasm. I said, "Absolutely, Greg. I'd love to help. This project is too important to mess up." And I meant every word, just not in the way he thought. Because phase 2 of my plan was about to begin. Over the next 2 weeks, I helped Greg prepare for his presentation. We met every day after work, sometimes for 2 or 3 hours. I brought my laptop, pulled up diagrams, and walked him through the technical details with the patience of a saint. But here's the thing. I didn't help him understand the real proposal. Instead, I fed him a slightly modified version. Nothing obviously wrong to a non-technical person. Just subtly different. Like a counterfeit bill that looks perfect until you hold it up to the light. I changed some of the key algorithms. Where the real proposal used a gradient descent optimization, I taught Greg about something I called recursive neural pathway optimization, a term I completely made up. It sounded impressive. It sounded cutting edge. It was absolute nonsense. I tweaked the architecture in ways that looked right on the surface but would fall apart under any serious technical scrutiny. I described data flows that created circular dependencies. I explained a caching strategy that would actually slow things down. I gave him formulas that, if you actually did the math, were essentially trying to divide by zero in an infinite loop. And I wrapped all of it in the most impressive-sounding jargon I could invent. Quantum-adjacent processing layers. Bidirectional entropy reduction. Asynchronous neural mesh topology. None of it meant anything. All of it sounded amazing. Greg ate it up like candy. He memorized my fake explanations like a parrot learning new phrases. He practiced in front of me, proudly reciting technical gibberish with the confidence of a man who has no idea how wrong he is. I'd nod encouragingly and say, "Perfect, that's exactly right. Dr. Chen is going to be really impressed." He'd beam. He'd actually beam, like a kid who just got a gold star. Meanwhile, I was busy building my real case. I went to Priya first. She'd seen me working on the proposal for weeks. She sat 3 desks away from me and had watched me hunched over my laptop every night. She'd even helped me test the prototype one Saturday afternoon, running simulations while I debugged the code. She was more than happy to provide a detailed written statement confirming that I was the sole author of the Project Atlas proposal, with specific dates and descriptions of the work she'd witnessed. Then I went to IT. I asked, very casually, like it was no big deal, if they could pull the version history from our shared drive. I told them I needed it for documentation purposes. See, I'd been saving drafts of my proposal on the company server for weeks before Greg stole it. Every version was timestamped with my employee credentials. Version 1, saved 3 weeks before Greg's submission. Version 2, a week later. Version 3, 4 days before. Greg's version, uploaded at 5:47 a.m. on the Monday he sent that email. A single upload, no prior versions, no editing history. Just a fully formed 40-page document appearing out of thin air. I also pulled up my Git commits from the prototype code repository. Every single line of code was committed under my account, with timestamps going back 3 weeks before Greg's submission. Hundreds of commits showing the evolution of the algorithm, my thought process captured in real time. Greg's account? 0 commits. Not one. The digital paper trail was bulletproof. But I wasn't done. Not even close. I reached out to 2 other team members who had, over the years, had their work stolen by Greg. I'd heard rumors, but I'd never followed up. Now I did. Derek Williams from the analytics team had a story that made my blood boil. 2 years ago, he developed a predictive maintenance algorithm that saved one of our clients $500,000 a year. Greg had presented it to the board as his own work and received a $50,000 bonus. Derek had gotten a pat on the back and a gift card to Applebee's, a $25 gift card, for $500,000 in client savings. Yuki Tanaka from QA had an even worse story. She'd identified a critical security vulnerability in our main product and developed a comprehensive fix. Greg had submitted her report to the CEO, taken credit for discovering the vulnerability, and been praised as a hero. Yuki had been told to keep up the good work, and nothing else. Both of them had stayed quiet because they thought no one would believe them. Derek had actually gone to HR once, and the complaint had been investigated and dismissed. He suspected Greg's uncle had made a phone call. When I told them what I was planning, they didn't hesitate. They were in. Derek dug up old emails and documents proving his work on the predictive maintenance algorithm. Yuki found her original security report with timestamps predating Greg's submission by 2 weeks. We had a pattern, a clear, documented pattern of theft. The day of the board presentation arrived. October 17th. I'll never forget that date. I made sure to get a front row seat in the boardroom. I told Greg I wanted to be there for moral support. He clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Thanks, buddy. Means a lot." Buddy. I almost laughed. Greg walked in looking like $1,000,000. New charcoal suit, fresh haircut, confident smile, power tie. He'd been practicing my fake explanations for 2 weeks straight. He had index cards, he had a laser pointer, he was ready, or at least he thought he was. Maria sat at the head of the table. Dr. Sarah Chen sat to her right, already reviewing a printed copy of the proposal with a highlighter. The rest of the board filled the remaining seats, 8 people total, including Uncle Richard, who gave Greg an encouraging wink. The first 15 minutes went fine. Greg breezed through the overview slides, the parts that were basically just my original executive summary, which even a non-technical person could present competently. He talked about the business case, the client relationship, the market opportunity. The board members nodded along. Maria looked pleased. Greg was in his element, the element of vague, high-level hand-waving. Then came the technical deep dive. Slide 16, the architecture diagram. Greg clicked forward and took a deep breath. I could see his index cards trembling slightly in his hand. He launched into his explanation with forced confidence. So the core of our approach is what I call recursive neural pathway optimization, he said, pointing his laser at the diagram. This is a proprietary technique that leverages quantum-adjacent processing layers to achieve bidirectional entropy reduction across the routing matrix. I watched Dr. Chen's eyebrows slowly rise. She put down her highlighter. Greg continued, gaining confidence from the silence he mistook for awe. The key innovation here is the asynchronous neural mesh topology, which allows us to process data streams in a nonlinear fashion while maintaining convergence through. He glanced at his index card. Recursive feedback loops that self-optimize in real time. Dr. Chen raised her hand. Greg paused, still smiling. "Excuse me, Greg. Can you walk me through the convergence criteria for this optimization function?" Because from what I'm seeing on this diagram, this approach would actually increase processing time exponentially, not decrease it. The feedback loops you're describing would create a circular dependency. Greg blinked. The smile flickered. Well, the convergence criteria is based on the, recursive neural pathway that I mentioned, which uses the quantum adjacent. That's not a real term, Dr. Chen said flatly. Quantum adjacent processing. That doesn't exist. Can you explain what you actually mean in standard computer science terminology? The room went quiet. Not uncomfortable quiet. Deathly quiet. You could hear the air conditioning humming. You could hear Greg's index cards rustling as his hands shook. Greg started sweating. Literally, visibly sweating. I watched a bead of perspiration form at his temple and roll slowly down the side of his face. He fumbled through 3 more questions from Dr. Chen, each answer worse than the last. He contradicted himself twice. He used the phrase, "it just works," in response to a question about algorithmic complexity. At one point, he said the system used artificial intelligence to do the artificial intelligence part, and I saw a board member close his eyes in secondhand embarrassment. He was drowning, thrashing, and everyone in that room could see it. That's when Maria stepped in, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Greg, I'm very concerned. The written proposal was exceptional, detailed, rigorous, technically sound, but you can't explain any of it. You can't answer basic questions about your own work. Can you explain this discrepancy?" The room held its breath, and that was my cue. I stood up, slowly, deliberately. Every head in the room turned to me. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips, but my voice was steady, calm, almost gentle. "Maria, if I may, I think I can explain the discrepancy." Greg's eyes went wide. The color drained from his face like someone had pulled a plug. He knew. In that moment, looking at me standing there with my USB drive in my hand, he knew exactly what was about to happen, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. "Please," Maria said, gesturing to the front of the room. I walked past Greg, close enough to smell his panic sweat, and plugged my USB drive into the presentation laptop. I pulled up a folder I'd prepared called Project Atlas, The Truth. First, I showed my original proposal, the real one, side by side with Greg's submission, identical, word for word, including the typo on page 23. Then I showed the timestamps. My first draft, saved to the company server 23 days before Greg's submission. My second draft, 15 days before. My final draft, 3 days before. Greg's upload, 5:47 a.m. on the Monday he sent the email. 1 upload, no history, no drafts. Then I showed the Git repository, 347 commits under my account, spanning 3 weeks. 0 commits under Greg's account. Then I played the audio recording. 53 minutes of me explaining every detail of my proposal to Greg in his office while he asked questions like, "So the machine learning part learns by itself? And what's a neural network again?" The room listened in stunned silence as Greg's own voice proved, beyond any shadow of doubt, that he had no understanding of the work he'd claimed as his own. Then I pulled up the written statements. Priya's detailed account of watching me develop the proposal over 3 weeks. Derek's story of his stolen predictive maintenance algorithm. Yuki's story of her stolen security report. 3 separate victims. 4 years of systematic theft. The room was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Maria's face went through about 7 different emotions in 10 seconds. Shock, confusion, anger, deeper anger, fury, cold, executive fury. Greg tried to talk. His voice cracked. "Now wait, I can explain. We collaborated on this. He's exaggerating." "Greg." Maria's voice could have frozen lava. "Stop talking, now." She turned to me. Her eyes were blazing, but her voice was controlled. "Is this your work? All of it?" "Every word, every line of code, every diagram. I have 3 years of performance reviews, email chains, and commit histories to prove it. And I'm not the only person Greg has done this to." Maria looked at the board. The board looked at Maria. Greg's uncle Richard, sitting at the far end of the table, had gone the color of old oatmeal. He looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. He didn't say a word. He didn't defend his nephew. He just sat there, shrinking. "This meeting is adjourned," Maria said. "Greg, you will come with me to HR, right now." Greg was escorted out of the boardroom. He didn't look at me as he passed. He couldn't. His shoulders were hunched, his head was down, and his expensive new suit suddenly looked like it was wearing him instead of the other way around. Now, here's where it gets even better, because the story didn't end in that boardroom. The HR investigation that followed was thorough and merciless. They pulled Greg's email records, his file access logs, his expense reports, everything. And what they found went way beyond stolen proposals. Greg had been inflating his department's budget for 2 years, funneling money to a consulting firm called Apex Strategic Solutions. The firm was owned by, wait for it, his college roommate, a guy named Todd Brennan. Apex had been paid over $300,000 for strategic consulting services. The actual services provided? Nothing. Zero. Nada. There were no deliverables, no reports, no meetings. It was a pure kickback scheme. Greg would approve inflated invoices, Todd would cash the checks, and they'd split the money. Greg wasn't just fired. He was fired with cause, which meant no severance package, no unused vacation payout, nothing. He was escorted from the building by security with a cardboard box of personal items, and his access badge was deactivated before he reached the parking lot. The company's legal team filed a civil suit to recover the embezzled funds. The case was referred to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation. Last I heard, Greg was facing charges for embezzlement and fraud. Todd Brennan was charged as an accomplice. Uncle Richard quietly resigned from the board 2 months later. The official statement said he was pursuing other opportunities. Nobody bought it. Everyone knew he'd been asked to leave before the company's connection to Greg's crimes became a bigger PR problem. As for me, Maria called me into her office the day after Greg was fired. She looked tired, but determined. She apologized personally, sincerely for what had happened. She said the company had failed me, and she was going to make it right. She offered me the lead position on Project Atlas, not as a senior developer, as Director of Engineering. Greg's old title, with a corner office and a 30% raise. She also approved a retroactive bonus for the proposal work and put me on the fast track for the senior leadership program she'd mentioned in her original email. I accepted, obviously. The next 6 months were the hardest and most rewarding of my career. I assembled a team. Priya was my first pick, obviously, and we built Project Atlas for real. Not the fake version I'd fed Greg. The real thing. My original vision, brought to life by a team of brilliant engineers who actually understood the work. We launched the first phase on schedule. TransGlobal's processing times dropped by 62%. Route efficiency improved by 15%, even better than my original projections. The client was ecstatic. They didn't just stay, they expanded their contract by 40%. Maria organized a company-wide celebration. 300 employees packed into the main conference hall. There was cake, there were balloons, there was a banner that said, Project Atlas, mission accomplished. During her speech, Maria said something I'll never forget. She stood at the podium, looked directly at me, and said, I want to especially thank the person who not only saved our biggest client relationship, but also had the courage to stand up for integrity when it would have been easier to stay quiet. This company is better because of people like you, and I want everyone in this room to know, if you do great work here, you will be recognized. That is my promise. The whole room applauded. Priya was in the front row, clapping so hard I thought her hands would fall off. Derek and Yuki were right next to her, grinning from ear to ear. Even some of the board members were clapping. I'm not going to lie, I teared up, not because of the recognition, although that felt incredible, but because for 3 weeks after Greg stole my work, I'd seriously considered just quitting, just walking away, updating my resume, finding another job, and letting Greg win. I'd lain awake at night thinking, is it even worth fighting? He's connected. He's powerful. Nobody's going to believe me. I'm so glad I didn't listen to that voice. So glad. Sometimes the best revenge isn't loud. It's not dramatic. It's not a screaming match or a viral social media post. It's just thorough, patient, methodical. You build your case brick by brick, and when the time comes, you don't need to yell. The truth does all the yelling for you. Oh, and one more thing. Remember that typo on page 23 of my original proposal? The one where optimization was spelled optimization? The one Greg left in when he stole it because he didn't even read the document carefully enough to catch it? It wasn't actually a typo. I'd put it there on purpose, a small deliberate error that I knew would appear in any copied version. A digital fingerprint. Call it a watermark. Call it insurance. Call it the smallest, pettiest, most satisfying detail in this entire story. Call it karma. Greg, if you're reading this, and I know you have a lot of free time these days, I hope you learned something. Next time you want to take credit for someone's work, maybe make sure they're not the kind of person who plans 3 moves ahead. Maybe make sure they don't record their meetings. Maybe make sure they don't leave traps in their documents. Or better yet, maybe just do your own work. I hear it's a novel concept. Checkmate, Greg. Checkmate.